Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to follow on in the footsteps of my previous series on a particular game, that was Avalon Hill's Jutland, and carry on looking at another classic title that company produced. And I'm thinking today of showing you move my head out the way, Victory in the Pacific. Now, this game appeared in 1977, hot on the heels of its sister game, War at Sea, and it introduced some very important new concepts to naval wargaming, particularly for the mass market. In an environment where many naval games were quite high complexity, and of course still are, this game brought in something new, and it brought in some elements that have lasted very much until the present day. You see them reiterated in various forms, including some games that have only just come out as of the recording of this video. And what I'm talking about is the idea of very simplistic, high strategic level naval operations. So really you are the supreme commanders of both sides, and the granular stuff is handled by your subordinates, or at least your cardboard subordinates. And so combat and ship stats and everything like that are quite it's not exactly command at sea, let's put it that way. It's greatly simplified. And the other element is the area movement aspect of it. So this game introduced a very interesting area movement mechanic, where vast swathes of the Atlantic in War at Sea and the Pacific in Victory in the Pacific were basically treated as one zone. I mean, just to give you an example, in Victory at Sea, the whole of Southeast Asia is basically one sea zone. Of course, that's a vast area of operations, but the game just puts it into that. The game only lasts 8 turns, and it doesn't have a very high density of units. So it was something new. It made a bit of a splash at the time. And although some wargamers derided it as being a bit too simplistic, they gave it very low marks for realism. Others really took to it. It played quickly. It had excellent appeal to people who were thinking about getting into simulation war games but were scared away by the really hardcore stuff. And even today, it's still regarded as quite a decent introductory war game. I found my copy when I was still a student, and I really loved it. I was playing slightly more detailed games back then anyway. But I liked the idea, and when I heard about Victory at Sea, Victory at Sea, what am I, no, War at Sea, Victory in the Pacific. Sorry, I'll stop getting my wires crossed in a second. When I heard about Victory in the Pacific, I really wanted to give it a go. So obviously we got that lovely, it's not a huge game, as you can see. Like Jutland, it comes in a rather slim box, the signature Avalon Hill style for these kind of games. There's the lovely box art, which is based on a painting owned by McDonnell Douglas, I believe. Yes, in fact, there's a credit right here. Painting by R.G. Smith. Of course, you have to have that classic moment, the fatal 5 minutes from the Battle of Midway. But let's crack this thing open in a nice way, because, antique from the 1970s, and let's see what we find in it. So the first thing you get in the box is some very nice hard-mounted maps. Again, it's the classic Avalon Hill fare, pretty sturdy stuff, and you've got a two-parter to this. So here is the Eastern Pacific, and you see what I mean about those enormous sea zones. I mean, we're talking about the largest ocean on the planet. And the whole of the Central Pacific is, including Midway Island, is one sector. There's Pearl Harbor down there, and there's the eastern half of the Japanese home islands. Its sister board, which mates with it, is very much the same sort of thing. So you get a large empty landmass for the mainland, and you also get Southeast Asia, Australia, all the familiar topography of the Pacific War. Now, some of you are probably wondering about the color coding because, okay, probably makes sense that Japan is in that sort of pinkish red. But if you remember a second ago, we saw that Pearl Harbor was the same color, Australia's the same color, so is Malaya and Vietnam. So why is this? Um, Basically, it's the difference between major ports, which can service ships somewhat more capably, major ports and major bases, and minor bases. Now, they have played a bit fast and loose with this because, strategically, you'd have thought the Philippines had the same strategic value as Malaya and Singapore. But essentially, what it comes down to in this game is the shipyard capacity. So whereas Singapore was graced with a major naval base, the Philippines has a lower status because Cavite, much respect to Cavite as a base, couldn't quite match that. So that is why you have that difference in color scheme. So otherwise, the map is pretty straightforward. There's no charts, there's no tables printed on it. In fact, if anything, you do, as I say, have these wide swathes of unused space. The only thing that is on it is the POC, or points of control track. And this is how the Allied and Japanese players track their scores relative to one another. And it is a sliding scale. You don't bank victory points. You're basically trying to outdo the other person and trying to push the indicator in the right direction. In addition to the boards, you have these very handy fleet organization sheets. These are very, very necessary to spare you a bit of heartache and also a bit of brain drain, because they help you to get everything sorted right at the beginning of the game. And when it's time for your reinforcements to appear, and this is a big one for the Allies, as you can see, they receive steady streams of reinforcements throughout the game. Your ships are ready to just be placed on the map in their assigned areas. Now might be a good time to just talk about what the ratings on the ships mean. So to those of you who've never encountered this system before, it's a very, very straightforward one. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get my camera to focus a bit. I'm not sure if it's actually doing it. Okay, that'll have to do, I think. So as you can see, each ship has 3 digits running from left to right. The first is its combat capability, the second is its protection rating, and the last is its speed. That really is it. That's all you need to know for most of them. Aircraft carriers have another digit which indicates their airstrike capability. Ground units expressed here also have these digits because they function as ships when they're at sea. As you can see, they have no offensive capability and they're basically just targets that need to be protected. And then you get land-based air units which have the same thing. They lack a movement factor because you simply place them on the map where you're able to deploy them. So these are really handy, quite useful. As you can see, the Allied one is somewhat more crowded than the Japanese one. The Japanese get virtually everything at the start and the early part of the war. And then unsurprisingly, as the realities of a long war make themselves felt, the Japanese struggle on with the trickle of reinforcements that they get afterwards. The rule book, again, fairly classic Avalon Hill fare for the time. Very, very small typeface by today's standards, but an extremely short rule book. Would you believe the rules for this are only 5 pages long? And I say that ignoring the optional rules at the back. The optional rules are great, but it's a perfectly serviceable game with the rules as given. And yes, there really isn't that much to it at all. And it forms a fairly straightforward sequence. Each turn, the 2 players have their rounds. The Japanese always go first, followed by the Allies to represent the code-breaking element. Ships are readied for sea in their home ports. Each player has to decide whether their ships are going to be going to sea on patrol or whether they're going to be raiding. Raiding has the advantage of extending the range of your ships, and they leave port after the patrolling ships go. So again, there's a bit of an element of aiding your planning there, because you can see who the patrollers are, and you can react accordingly. However, critical point, raiding ships cannot control territories and have to, or sea areas, and have to return home at the end of the round. So it's quite simplistic again, but there's a very interesting balance of strategic consideration there that players have to put some thought into. Combat, again, for those who have already encountered this system, is basically buckets of dice. Each ship or aircraft carrier or air unit, whenever they're eligible to fire, they announce their target and they roll one dice, 1d6. For each point of firepower they have. So let's say a battleship, which is rated 444, will roll 4 dice if it's not already damaged. Hits are scored on a 5 or 6 if you've got a plain number. If you've got a circled number, that means you have enhanced firepower, so you hit on a 4, 5, or 6. So if you get a lower tier hit, a 5 if you've got a regular armament, a 4 if you've got, I'll call it enhanced armament, you disable your target and it is removed from the battle. If you roll an actual hit, you then roll again, 1 dice per hit, and that amount is of damage is added to the target vessel or the target air unit. So it really is that simple. So combat, depending on the number of participants, can be over pretty quickly. Sometimes it does drag on when you get large fleets. But again, all fairly quickly read, digested. Again, because the Allies do have so many ships, they had to print their starting forces on the back of the rule book. What are the pieces like? So we've seen the boards. The board's quite nice, really good for their day. Probably a bit garish by modern standards, but you know, that's what you had at the time. The generic counters look something like this. And by the generic, I should say shared counters, I'm talking damage points, indications that a ship is crippled, and you've got the control markers. So obviously the big rectangular ones are for Sea Zone, Rising Sun, obviously for Japanese, Stars and Stripes for the United States. We've got a victory point marker there. The ships, I'll start with the Japanese. I'll keep these in their bag because I think trying to hold them to the camera doesn't work all that well if I'm just waving an individual piece at you. It has trouble focusing. But if you can see, some of them are upside down. There's you've got your ship silhouette, you've got your 3 numbers, you've got the name of the vessel. So patrolling ships go to sea with their coloured side up. That's how you know they're patrolling. If their white side is up, you know they're raiding. It's just a very easy visual reference for what a ship is doing and what its mission brief is. And you can also see the Japanese air units, so they're in yellow. The air units and ground units are always smaller. It's just one way of helping to differentiate them. And also they're very differently coloured. So the Japanese air and ground units are a rather bright, cheery yellow. For the Allied units, fairly conventional colour scheme. So you've got the Commonwealth in blue-grey. You've got the US Navy in a slightly deeper blue. And you have the Dutch. Yes, the Dutch are here, bless them. The Dutch have that light grass green. Exactly the same conventions as the Japanese counters, coloured side for patrol, white side for raiding. And of course, there's a slightly deeper grey, you can't really tell, but Allied air units and the US Marines, like their Japanese equivalents, are on those smaller counters. So there you go. As far as components are concerned, that is it. That is Victory in the Pacific. So it's quite a nice, compact game. I know when you hold all the counters up together, it looks like there's an awful lot of them, but I've seen some War in the Pacific games where that would be regarded as a small game. The only real attempt to model Anything in detail is when it comes to capital ships, carriers, battleships, and cruisers. Anything smaller than that is folded into the larger game system and represented abstractly. Ground units and land-based air units are really, really abstract. As we will see when I go on to my next video, which will be a demonstration of how this marvelous game works. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for the attention and your company as always, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this very, very quick and very brief introduction to Victory in the Pacific. I will get the title of the game right this time. And I look forward to seeing you all in the demonstration video. If you happen to be there, it'll be great to have your company, and look forward to giving this thing a test drive for you. So until then, thank you very much and take care. Bye.